Monitoring the department's estimates last night with CASA?
No, Senator, I wasn't.
You weren't?
Sorry, Leonie Horrocks, General Manager, Airports. No, Senator, I didn't.
Right, okay. We had a bit of a talk about CASA's involvement in advising the department about the adequacy or otherwise of plans that airport leaseholders put forward as their master plan.
Certainly.
And Essendon was a case in point where it's proposed possibly to shorten a runway. And I was asking CASA about their professional input, which says that the length of the runway, particularly for lower weight aircraft under 5,700 kilos, is not just a function of the flight manual, but there are a number of factors that have to be applied which significantly lengthens the requirement that an operator has to meet to allow for engine failures and other things. So CASA confirmed that that was the case, that they have to be applied. Could I ask if the advice that a consultant gave as part of a master planning process didn't include that information, that factoring information, and it was subsequently shown that CASA had verified that the figures they'd interpolated from the flight manual were correct, but hadn't actually notified the department that, well, the operator has to take these other things into account, and so the runway that was proposed by the master plan ended up being too short for the aircraft who were using it. What would happen to the master planning process? Would it be overturned? Would you go back and change it? What would the department do in that case?
Senator, perhaps John Doherty, Acting Deputy Secretary. Perhaps I could start the answer, and Ms Horrocks may wish to add to it. The general thrust of your question about whether in considering a master plan we would look to the impact of a change in runway, not only in terms of the technical compliance with a manual, but in terms of the overall impact about how would that change affect the operations. Clearly our interest would be in being able to assess the impact on operations practically. In terms of the detail of how that assessment is conducted, I think it's correct that we would be looking to CASA for an assessment on some of those technical aspects. So in relation to the impact that the advice that they provide in relation to each master plan, we would be looking for that sort of advice. When it comes to input from a technical expert or consultant engaged by the airport, we would be keen to understand whether that's reliable and get an expert opinion ourselves on that, and initially that would come from CASA. If that information is available then to the Minister would make his call in terms of whether that master plan is something that should be approved or not.
Okay. The question I guess I have for you is that I have a large number of complaints from operators at Archerfield Airport who contend that the expert who was called to support the master planning process looked at the AFM, the flight manual, and derived from that for each of the aircraft types that fly at Archerfield a strip length for the new north-south runway, which was less than 1,000 metres, I think it's about 900 metres, but did not take into account the factoring that the CAOs require an operator to put into their operations manual. They contend that CASA, in double-checking the figures on behalf of the department, said yes, they accurately interpreted the AFM, but didn't highlight the fact that factoring had not been included. Therefore, the master plan, which has been approved, endorses a runway which is too short to meet the legal requirements that CASA actually require the operators to meet. So my question is, if that contention is validated, what will happen to the master plan?
Senator, I think CASA took on notice last night the issue about what exactly their assessment was and what it covered in the Archerfield circumstance, and I'd certainly be happy to take on notice from our side to look at that assessment. In terms of the impact of that decision, I I'm not entirely sure at this stage just where the process of the runway changes at Archerfield are, and whether there would be some formal further approval required before they were actually given effect to.
I think, Senator, if I may add, I think our view would be, in the circumstances you've outlined, where it was shown that there was that error, there was any error or there was further information which may have changed that consideration, that would not necessarily invalidate the master plan. What it would do, though, at the time the airport was to bring forward a major development proposal for the runway work, and I'll ask Ms Horrocks to comment about the status of that. That is the point at which that adjustment would need to be made, and that separate approval process would apply. I'm not too sure, coming to your question, I don't think our view would be that the master plan would be invalid, because it is a concept planning document which sets out predominantly for zoning and planning purposes. The details of any runway shortening at either Archerfield or Essendon would have to be dealt through an MDP and a specific approval program. And I'll just get, if you don't mind, Ms Horrocks to give us an update on where we think Archerfield is at on that runway proposal.
Senator, Archerfield has not developed the MDP at this point in time, so we would normally seek to look at any preliminary or exposure draft of an MDP and identify any required information at that point in time, and then it would go through the legislative process for an MDP.
Okay. Can I just go to a broader issue now around the Commonwealth's responsibilities in terms of both airports it has gifted or sold or leased? There's a number under that, but there is a common theme, and you'll be very well aware, Mr Murdoch, I've raised almost every estimate for a few years now, the issues by aircraft operators, whether they be maintenance shops or flying schools or charter operators, where they feel as though the monopoly power of an airport owner or leaseholder has led to unconscionable decisions in terms of conditions of lease renewal or barring them doing certain things on the airport, which to a layman's reading appear to be in direct contravention to the terms of the lease in terms of maintaining the airport for aviation, not barring unreasonable access for airlines or aircraft operators for aviation-related activities. Now, the feedback I've had from the department, again and again, is that it's a commercial issue and that those people should take up their commercial remedies. I've had feedback from a number that they have tried that with no success, from the point of view that people say this is an issue between the Commonwealth as the holder of either as the owner of the land and at the head of the lease, or in the case of a sale, such as Broome International Airport, where it was actually sold, the covenant that was signed between the purchaser and the Commonwealth, it points back to the Commonwealth having responsibility. So could I just ask, has the department sought legal advice as to its responsibilities or powers it may have to enforce the terms of a lease or the covenant that was signed by somebody that it sold an airport to?
Senator, you're right that there are two different categories. In relation to the ALOP deeds, which are the deeds that which applied in relation to the transfer of many of the regional airports, not the leased federal airports, we have taken legal advice on issues from time to time, which clearly shows some gaps in the capacity. And the practice over a period of time with those leases has been that we are able and do, as a matter of policy, ensure that the airports continue to operate as airports, but that our powers to control in what happens on the airport in any more detail would be very limited. In relation to the federal leased airports, we obviously have a range of more direct regulatory controls which go through the master planning and development plan processes, and in that circumstance we're trying to achieve the right balance between the airport operators' rights in relation to the site which they acquired through a tender process, and the development of the site and the interests of the users.
The question that arises, though, from somebody who's invested significant money into an asset, for example, a hangar onto an airport, is that if the Commonwealth has signed a lease or a sale document with a covenant that says this will be maintained predominantly for an aviation purpose, and then they're told that they can't actually park private aircraft on the airfield because it's running out of space, and yet the airport owner is selling off airport land for housing, how is that maintaining the prime purpose of that airport for aviation? And if indeed we have signed the covenant, what is the point of a contract or a covenant if it's not going to be enforced?
Senator, again, coming back to, I think the example that you gave there of selling land for housing is not something that we've seen happen on the leased federal airports where we have that greater level of control. It is perhaps something that can happen at the ALOP airports, where, as I explained, we have a much lesser degree of control, both legally and in terms of the policy intent of the ALOP program.
My question, though, Mr Doherty, is you say you have less control, but has that been tested either in court or via legal opinion? Because if the covenant is to be worth anything, then surely there must be some recourse if the terms of what the purchaser has covenanted with the Commonwealth to do is not followed through. If there is no head of power, then what's the point of the Commonwealth entering into a sale that has a covenant?
Senator, as I indicated, under the ALOP deeds, my understanding is there has been legal advice on a number of issues over a number of years as they've arisen. So our position, as we understand it, reflects the legal advice that we've received.
Are you able to provide that legal advice to the committee?
Senator, I can take that on notice.
Mm-hmm. Because my concern is that if we're seeing this behaviour already, and we've talked at length about the examples at the leased airports, and we're seeing examples at these ALOP airports, then the aviation sector is increasingly coming under pressure, and at this point in time it appears they have no recourse to actually preserve the physical asset they require to run their business, which is an airport, when they are constantly being squeezed by housing or by increasing rates. You know, I've got some examples of people who are having rate increases of up to 300%, having rate reviews in years that are not supposed to be rate reviews, and the operator of the airport's just saying, well, I make the rules. I mean, where is the recourse? Where is the justice for those people?
And Senator, are those circumstances ALOP or leased federal airports?
That one in particular was a sold airport.
So leased federal airport?
No, a sold airport.
Oh, no, sorry, ALOP, okay. This is the example of Broome. Yeah. Well, Broome is in a different category given the nature of the federal government disposal of that site as a freehold sale.
But still with a covenant.
Still with a covenant to retain that site as an airport. That's absolutely right.
Not only retain the site as an airport, but the covenant also goes to issues around the nature of the relationship between the owner and the operators on that airport, which there appears to be a number of quite clear breaches of the terms of that covenant.
I think we'll take on notice. We have had some legal advice in the past about the powers that we have under that covenant, and certainly in relation to the ALOP. I think, as Mr Doherty's indicated, our powers are not as extensive as we might otherwise be imagined, but we'll come back to you with some advice on that.
Sure.